afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Joseph Severi. I'm a lawyer in San Francisco with the Joseph Severi Law Firm. I'm a lawyer who handles antitrust and class action litigation all over the United States. We've got some news today we're going to announce. I'm going to introduce some of the other folks who are up here. There's going to be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. We also have media packets which are available in hard copy, and they'll also be available electronically at a web address that you'll be able to get at the end. So let me just do the introductions. First, I want to introduce Cung Lee. He's one of the most decorated martial artists and UFC fighters in the country. He's won 3 U.S. Open International Martial Arts championships. He's won numerous medals in amateur Sanshou competitions. He is one of the most well-known athletes in the sport. He's considered by some to be a modern Bruce Lee. He's appeared in motion pictures. Mr. Lee also calls San Jose his home. Next to him is Nathan Quarry. He's a professional mixed martial artist who was fought for the Ultimate Fighting Championship and whose image was utilized by the UFC. He's appeared on the Ultimate Fighter reality series. He's also co-hosted MMA Uncensored Live. Next on the phone is Jon Fitch, who couldn't be here because of injury. Mr. Fitch is one of the most accomplished MMA athletes in the country. He has won a remarkable 8 welterweight championships in a row, and he couldn't be here today, but he's available on the telephone. And let me introduce a number of the lawyers who are here. Mr. Benjamin Brown is a lawyer with the Cohen-Milstein firm in Washington, D.C. He's a nationwide expert on antitrust law. He has worked in the Department of Justice, tried cases all over the country. Next to him is Michael Delangelo. He is a partner in the Philadelphia firm of Berger and Montag. He's been recognized as a super lawyer. He handles these types of cases all over the country. Mr. Robert Mazie is a partner with the firm. He is an expert on all facets of the mixed martial arts industry. He's widely written on the subject, and he's been working in this area for over 10 years. So the news today is this, that at approximately 12:45 this afternoon, these fighters filed a class action antitrust lawsuit in federal court in San Jose. The complaint alleges a claim under the federal antitrust laws for monopolization against Zuffa LLC, which does business as Ultimate Fighting Championship, or UFC. The complaint is long and detailed, and you'll have copies of it to read. But the basic allegations can be boiled down this way. Today, there is only one real promotional option for elite professional MMA fighters, the UFC. The reason that there's only one option is that the UFC has systematically shut down its competitors over the years and essentially prevented any real competitive alternative promotion from coming into the market. The consequence of that has been very serious and severe to MMA athletes. Not only have the MMA athletes been unable to obtain what they're worth in this sport, but they've also lost control of their likenesses and their ability to profit from their own ability. And the purpose of the lawsuit that we filed is basically to right these wrongs, to change the status quo, and to restore healthy competition in this industry. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So let me introduce Ben Brown of the Cohen-Milstein firm, who's going to talk a little bit about the history of UFC's monopolization in this market.
Thank you, Joe. Today's filing is the culmination of a lot of work and will hopefully begin a successful campaign that will result in changes in industry and damages paid to fighters who've had earnings and options limited by the actions of the UFC. UFC was built on the backs of fighters. In fact, it was built on the battered bodies of MMA athletes who have left their blood and sweat in the octagon. These fighters sacrifice an incredible amount for the sport, yet the UFC has paid fighters far less than what it would have paid in a truly competitive environment. The fact is that elite MMA fighters earn a fraction of the revenue generated by bouts, earn a mere fraction of the revenue generated by bouts as compared to their counterparts in boxing. And due to the UFC's anti-competitive scheme, the UFC's profit margins are the highest or among the highest in all of sport. These great athletes have decided to correct this fundamental unfairness for themselves and all other class members. How do we get to this point? It's simple. The UFC has monopolized the highest level of the sport. According to Dana White in 2010, and this is a direct quote, "There is no competition. We're the NFL. You don't see people looking at the NFL and going, yeah, but he's not the best player in the world because there's a guy playing for the Canadian Football League or the Arena League over here. We're the NFL. There is no other guy." Now, the UFC achieved this monopolist position by anti-competitive means. Specifically, the UFC used a series of exclusive arrangements to lock up the important assets for high-level MMA promotion, most importantly the fighters themselves, and then bought out and shut down its weakened competition. By 2011, the only potentially robust competitor, the UFC, was Strikeforce, an MMA promotion company that rose to prominence in the very city of San Jose, where they promoted 19 events. Strikeforce had been threatening to become a major force in the MMA industry. In 2011, in March, however, the UFC bought Strikeforce and ultimately shuttered that promotion. After the UFC's acquisition of Strikeforce, the UFC controlled virtually all elite professional MMA fighters in every weight class. Going forward, this ensured that to obtain recognition as an elite fighter and gain the corresponding public notoriety, a professional MMA fighter must sign with and compete against UFC fighters. While all these acquisitions and other efforts to shut down the competition are an important aspect of this case, there's a lot more to how UFC came to monopolize this industry. It's laid out in the complaints that you'll have access to. Here to talk a little bit more about how the UFC limits competition, here's Michael Delangelo of the firm of Berger-Monte.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to the members of the press and media who are present today as well. The problem that this case seeks to remedy is broader than the UFC's history of acquisition and aggressive shutting down of rival promoters and would-be promoters. It's also about a web of exclusive agreements that the UFC has with venues, promotions, and sponsors. But those facets of the case would not have had the same damaging effect on competition were it not for the oppressive and anti-competitive restraints that the UFC imposes on all elite MMA athletes. One of the most pernicious things that the UFC does is insist on exclusive, worldwide, and perpetual personality and identity rights of everyone who ever fights for the UFC. This prevents UFC fighters from financially benefiting from reputations that they built during their MMA careers, even after their death. This locks UFC fighters out of revenues generated by the UFC's exploitation of their identities, including after the terms of their contracts. Thus, although a single loss could allow the UFC to terminate a UFC fighter's contract, the UFC can still forever restrict a UFC fighter's ability to promote himself or herself for profit, even after the fighter's career with the UFC is over. The UFC has also signed up virtually every MMA fighter to a long-term exclusive contract with provisions that allow the UFC to extend those terms indefinitely. This deprives alternative promotions from signing elite MMA talent that's necessary to compete with the UFC. It cuts off competition and makes successful new entry into the market for live, elite MMA promotions virtually impossible. In turn, that gives the UFC all the leverage that it needs to drive fighter compensation down and to drive its own profit margins up. When you take a step back and you examine the effects of the competitive restraint, the effects become clear. Fighters have little opportunity to escape the UFC, and even when they do, they never regain their rights to their own identities as fighters, which were signed away forever. Would-be rival promoters are denied the opportunity to openly bid for elite MMA talent at the prime of their careers. When one combines the history of monopolization that Ben Brown talked about with the contracting practices of the UFC, it becomes easy to understand why the only alternative promotions the UFC that one sees in MMA today are effectively minor leagues without access to top talent and top sponsors. Fighters deserve better. These competitors deserve competition. Now, I'd like to introduce Robert Macy from the law firm of Warner Angle, who has a few final words about the case and will also give additional introductory comments regarding our client.
First, I would like to thank everyone for appearing today. Thank you to the media for coming and those who have dialed in. I want to thank Ben Brown from the law firm of Cohen Milstein, Eric Kramer, and Michael Delangelo from Berger Montague, Joe Severi from the Severi Law Firm, and Jerome Elwell and my partners at Warner Angle. This has been a long time in the making. I want to thank everyone in the mixed martial arts industry that has helped me over the years. You've given your time to me to help us get here. I very much appreciate it. They go unnamed for obvious reasons. That's why we're here today. I want to thank, I want to thank Carlos Newton. His support for this case has been unwavering. And for the athletes in this sport, he's been there all along. Carlos is a former welterweight champion in the UFC. He fought all over the world. And he's developed the notoriety through the sport through his efforts in competition. Very important to him. At its heart, this lawsuit is about fundamental fairness. These are world-class athletes. By competing in the UFC, these athletes take enormous risks to their health, safety, well-being. It's a basic right that they should get compensated for and share in the fruits of their labor. It's hard to imagine a more fundamental right than the right to obtain compensation for one's talent and hard work. Yet the UFC has systematically undercompensated these athletes for competing in bouts by expropriating their likeness in perpetuity. What determines what is fair compensation? A free and unfettered marketplace. Unfortunately, these athletes don't enjoy that. These athletes deserve the opportunity to participate and compete in a market with as fierce a competition as they do in the octagon. The complaint filed today details these specific claims. This is an antitrust suit. The antitrust laws of the United States were designed to prevent a firm from dominating a market, artificially stifling competition, and hoarding super competitive profits for themselves. That is exactly what happened in this market. Further, the UFC has used its market dominance in the promotion of elite MMA events to extend into entirely different segments of the MMA industry, acquiring even more dominance every step they take over the careers of the athletes who make the sport great. That's why we all love it. The time is now. I want to thank especially these plaintiffs, Cung, Nathan Quarry, Jon Fitch, who's on the line. They're the reason we're here today. These brave and courageous fighters have decided enough is enough. On behalf of themselves and all other classmates or class members, these athletes who have suffered at the hands of the UFC look forward to having their claims resolved in federal court by a jury on behalf of themselves and all the other class members. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. I'd like to introduce Cung, who would like to make some statements about the case. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. First of all, I'd like to thank my wife and our kids for all the support. You know, Jane, who's been with me, one of my first students ever, and it's been a definitely tough road, and I'm just honored to be part of this lawsuit against UFC for all the past UFC fighters like Carlos, Newton, and Nate, and just so many names that I need to list here, and for all the future fighters, and potentially one day, if my kids want to pursue the same path as I do, they would have have a better situation to be in, and I'm just very excited to get this going.
Now making comments is Nathan Quarry.
I too want to thank everyone for being here. I know in the past, quite often, any journalist that actually stood up for something that may not portray the UFC in the brightest light was frowned upon. They may have had their credentials taken. So it takes bravery for all of you to be here. And a big thank you to these great firms that we're working with, and especially Carlos Newton, for being one of the driving forces in making this happen with his passion, and for Cung as well for stepping up while he's still under contract with the UFC. I've received so many messages from fighters who wish to remain anonymous, but who are putting their full support behind this case because they know that what will come their way won't be the most favorable thing. So for Cung to stand up while he's still under contract says quite a bit. This lawsuit really is about fairness. It's about a fair market value for the athletes. And over again, we've seen that that's just not been the case, as the UFC has taken over the entire industry and dictated its terms upon the fighters without any say. We don't have any rights. It's the word that comes down. This is the new religion, as it were. That's how things are going to be. And it's time for those things to change. We deserve to reap the fruits of our labors. We deserve a free marketplace where we can compete. Not just to be dictated. This is your salary. This is what your value is. We deserve to be out in a free marketplace where we can compete for ourselves. And we deserve to have a say in our careers. Where we're going, who we're fighting, the title fight, where our likeness is used. These are things that UFC has taken for granted for far too long. I'm very proud to speak on behalf of the gentlemen here, the past fighters of the UFC, the current fighters of the UFC, and the future fighters for the UFC. Because if we don't take a stand now, nothing is going to change. And we know that. We know that over time. So I'm very thankful for myself that I'm able to be here and hopefully affect a change that's going to change the entire marketplace of MMA now and moving forward.
So I'm Eric Kramer from Berger and Monte. We'd like to now open up the panel here to questions, and we'll see how long it goes, depending on how many questions you have and what you're asking. But why don't we start? So whoever has questions, I'll call on you, and then we can move forward. Anybody have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
How long has this been in the planning?
Who are you with?
I'm Greg Savage from Sherdog.com. How long have you guys been working with this lawsuit together?
I don't think that's the kind of thing we want to tell you, but it didn't come together overnight, as you can probably tell from the detailed and lengthy complaint and some of the comments that you've already heard.
Sure. What is the ultimate goal? It seems like affecting a change in the marketplace for the fighters, but can you lay out the process, what this looks like over the next year, 2, 3 years, however long it takes?
Well, it will probably take a while. These kinds of lawsuits do tend to take some time. The goal is to defeat whatever comes our way from the defendant in the lawsuit. The goal is to obtain class certification for the classes that we seek certification on. There's, as you see from the complaint, there's one class that we call the identity class and one class that we call the bout class. We're going to seek certification, ask the court to certify those classes and certify the individuals you see before you as representatives of those classes. And then we're going to seek to win a trial, damages, and seek an injunction from the court.
My next question would be, what does that injunction look like, and what kind of relief do you expect to get if you get one?
At this point, I'm not going to outline all of that, but the ultimate goal, as you've heard from the previous speakers, is free and fair competition. We want to reverse some of what you see as anti-competitive conduct by the UFC to allow there to be free and fair competition between promotions and promoters in the industry, which, as we know as antitrust lawyers, when you have more competition, you have lower prices for fans, higher compensation for fighters.
What would that environment look like if you're successful?
What would competition look like? It would look like.
What would you expect? The MMA look like if you are successful.
Well, it's hard.
Because contracts are exclusive. I mean, is that something you're looking forward to? Is breaking exclusivity of contracts?
I don't want to get into the specifics of what we're going to be asking for in terms of an injunction. We're a long way from there. But what we want is a free and fair market. We want competitions that would exist in a free and fair market. We want free and fair competition. And that's what we're going to be fighting for. Anybody else?
Kind of explain what the difference is between, say, the UFC structure as the major league in the sport as compared to many other professional sports, whether it's the NFL or NHL, which all basically have the majority of the top athletes in those sports within their league, and anyone who has tried to promote competition leagues has pretty much been crushed in a lot of these sports in the past.
Does anybody else want to take that question? Ben or Rob, maybe?
Sure. Is that Dave?
Dave, yeah.
So it's Dave Meltzer of Yahoo Sports that asked that question.
Not Yahoo Sports, but MMA fighting.
Oh, I'm sorry, MMA fighting. Sorry. The short answer to that question is the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, those are league sports. Each team is individually owned. So even within the league, you have competition amongst different owners who compete and bid on talent. And in addition to the league serving as kind of the monopoly provider of elite play in particular sport, those leagues also are all represented by a players' association to counterbalance the monopoly held by the league. Structurally, that's the biggest difference.
So are you looking for something to unionize fighters? Is that part of this?
We're not.
It has nothing to do with this.
Okay. But as far as something like a PGA or tennis, I mean, those are individual sports without teams, and so that actually would be a closer thing to UFC.
I think that is accurate. The PGA, tennis, each tournament is not owned by one owner.
That's true.
Anybody else? Anybody else have a question?
And that is star and one if you have a question on the phone.
Anybody on the line have a question? Go ahead.
That is star and one if you have a question on the phones. One moment while they queue. We'll take our first question from Bob Jablon of Associated Press.
Yes, I'd like to ask one of the fighters if they can give us a sense personally of how they've been damaged by the alleged behavior of the UFC.
This is Eric Kramer. Because we're going to be discussing that we both discuss it a bit in the complaint, and we'll be discussing it in the lawsuit. And because it's a class action, which is not about individual damages, we do claim that everybody has been harmed through suppressed compensation and suppressed compensation both for bouts and for their identities. I don't think that's appropriate at this time for the fighters to answer. They would be willing to answer the question why they're involved in the lawsuit, however. Is that something you'd like to have answered?
Well, I'm looking more for money. I'd like to have some sort of damages that you're asking for, or how much they think they could have made under a freer market, anything to give the reader a sense of what we're talking about here.
So that is a more global question, not for any individual fighter. The way that will be calculated in this case is we will work with and have been working with economists who will evaluate, based on analogs to other sports and economic models, what the compensation would be in a free and fair market, a market unfettered by a monopoly, and compare that to what the compensation is under the existing market. And that will be the difference between that is the damages that we're seeking in this case. That has not been computed or calculated yet, but suffice it to say, it will be substantial.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, we'll have one from Eddie Goldman of No Holds Barred.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. First of all, congratulations to everybody fighting for justice on this. My question is really for the fighters. The main owners of the UFC have also faced a lot of demonstrations because of injustices in their other business, station casinos, and we're in an era now where a lot of people are demonstrating against injustices. Do you foresee linking up with either other athletes from other sports or other people from unions and community groups to join this battle with other similar battles that are going on?
This is Eric Kramer again, speaking for the legal team. This lawsuit is about a particular antitrust claim and justice for the fighters in the UFC. There are broader justice issues in the society, but there's only so many wrongs you can right in a lawsuit. And we're going to fight this particular fight in this particular court and try to right the particular wrong that we're facing. And hopefully by righting that wrong, we'll set an example for righting other wrongs in society. But we can only take on only so much.
That's really not what I asked. What I want to know is there going to be a strategy outside the courtroom of linking up with other organizations, particularly unions that have been going up against these same people in Las Vegas and elsewhere to do something beyond just what goes on.
I'm going to jump in. This is Rob Macy. That is really not the scope of the antitrust suits. We want to bring it back to why we're here today, why these athletes joined onto this claim. What you're talking about does not involve this lawsuit.
All right. Well, hopefully, are you going to be working with any of the other athletes associations, MLB, NFL, and others?
We're not doing that as of now.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we'll take a question from David Bixenscan of WrestlingObserver.com.
Hey, guys. This is sort of, relate to some of the specific fighters, but I'm going to try to ask it in a general way, so bear with me. One thing that Jon and Cung both have experience with, albeit on different sides of the coin, is what happened with the video game licensing and the ancillary rights. And I was wondering if I could get maybe their perspective and also the lawyer's perspective on kind of how that, because I did see that in the filing, kind of give perspective to how that pertains to everything that we're talking about today.
This is Eric Kramer again, one of the legal team. I think that's probably too far into the weeds at this point in time that we'd like to go to in this particular press conference. There's going to be a long period of discovery in this case where documents are exchanged and things are learned, and each of the pieces to the puzzle as part of the anti-competitive scheme we've alleged are put together in more detail, and we'd really not like to get into how each piece fits together other than what's already in the complaint at this time.
All right.
Anything else?
And we'll take our next question from Ariel Helwani of MMAFighting.com.
Hey guys, thanks for taking my call. I just had a couple of questions. Will other fighters be added to the lawsuit, to the class action suit?
We haven't made, this is Eric Kramer again, we haven't made a decision one way or another. It's certainly possible. There are lots of fighters that have shown interest.
Okay, that was actually my next question.
Yeah, so that's just it's a question that we have not answered as of yet, but whatever we do, you'll see it because it'll be a public filing.
And would you be able to, in a pretty, I know it's a long process as you mentioned, but just sort of lay out an early timeline of what we can expect for those of us that don't cover legal matters? I mean, what is the process here that we can expect to see unfold?
So there are various things that will happen. The first thing that will happen is that we filed the complaint, so that's the first thing. Zuffa, the defendant, will be served formally with the complaint. Then they will have an opportunity to respond to the complaint. They can either answer it or move to dismiss. We don't know what they will decide to do. If they answer it, then we begin a period of discovery, which is where both sides take each other's depositions and exchange documents, and we move towards trial. If they move to dismiss the complaint, that we answer that with a brief. The court decides whether the case moves forward or not. We expect it to move forward, and then we go into discovery and move forward. So the first step would be answer or motion to dismiss. The next step likely would be some measure of discovery. After that, you have seeking of class certification. Again, we're seeking certification, asking the court to designate the bout class and identity class as classes so that these fighters can represent all of the fighters who are similarly situated, and the court needs to do that under Rule 23 of the federal rules. And after that, we seek an injunction through the court and a jury trial for damages.
And if it does go to the trial...
Could you repeat that, Ariel? You didn't come through all the way.
Mr. Helwani, could you please press star and 1? Your line is open, sir.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, you came back, Ariel. Could you repeat that last question you asked?
Yeah, just two more quick ones. I was just wondering if it does in fact play out and go to a trial, that would take place in San Jose, correct?
That's where we filed the case, and that's where we would hope to have the trial, yeah.
Okay, and my final question is, I'm just curious to get your take or anyone's take there on Bellator MMA's place in the market, because unless I was mistaken, I didn't hear their name mentioned, and they're owned by Viacom. So if you are in fact saying that the UFC is a monopoly right now, what's your take on their status and their place in the current MMA market?
I think that's the kind of granular question that we don't want to get into at the moment. It's obviously going to be something that is discussed in the case, and we discussed Bellator in the complaint. There's a section in the complaint about would-be rivals to the UFC and potential rivals to the UFC, and I think that what's in the complaint is what we want to say about that at this time.
Okay, and does Viacom have any involvement in this lawsuit at all?
No.
Thank you.
And we'll take our next question from Gabriel Montoya of thesocialunderground.com.
Good afternoon, and congratulations to all of you. Actually, Ariel covered a lot of what I wanted to ask. I'm curious, though, the question for Cung Le, with what happened with you recently with the UFC, with them botching your drug test and pretty much defaming your name, was that the straw that broke the camel's back for you to attach yourself to a lawsuit of this magnitude?
Mr. Lee, do you want to describe why you're involved in the lawsuit?
Not at all. My involvement in this lawsuit is more for the fighters of the past, the present, and the future, and that's why I'm involved in this lawsuit.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you very much.
Is there somebody in the room that has a question?
I did have a question. You said those are the two, John Nash, Loyola. You said those are the two class members you have now. Do you have any plans in the future to identify future classifications?
So we have 3 named plaintiffs or proposed representatives.
Right now, the ballots and the identity.
Those are the 2 classes that we're seeking.
No plans for any future ones? Or?
Not at this time.
I have a question too.
Yeah.
Is what type of, and I don't even know if you can answer this, but what type of things in contracts do you think are fair and not fair as far as exclusivity, obviously the renewal, renewal to perpetuity in certain cases as far as matching rights and things. Is this suit involved in that type of, details of the fighter contracts?
Here's what I would say about that. We're not filing a lawsuit about the fairness or unfairness of particular contracts. This lawsuit is about a scheme by the UFC to deprive rival promoters of key inputs to rivals. One of the key inputs to rivals are elite MMA fighters. Those elite MMA fighters are locked up for life, and their identities are locked up for life. Rivals can't blossom. So we're not going to be talking about particular provisions in particular contracts, but our complaint does lay out, and you can read it, why we think certain aspects of the standard contract that the UFC uses allows the UFC to dominate its market.
Now, when you're talking about like rights for life, now if a fighter, like use Cung as an example, okay, you're fighting in UFC, they have certain rights. Let's say that you want to continue your career, you're fighting for another organization, they put out a video game. Is he allowed in that video game, or does UFC have exclusives on that even after he's out of the organization?
So you're asking how the contracts currently work. I think Mr. Mazie here would know the answer to that question. I don't want to say something that...
The typical video game assignment that the UFC takes the rights to utilize the identity of the athlete in perpetuity so long as they're used within X amount of time, 2 to 3 years.
So that's our understanding of the contract. Anything else? Anybody else on the phone?
Yes, we do have some on the phone. Our next one comes from Kenai Andrews of MMA Crossfire.
Thanks for taking my call. Just a quick question. Has there been any response from the UFC during this process of putting the suit together?
Not that we're aware of.
I'm sorry?
Not that we're aware of.
Okay. Thank you.
And we have a question from Stephen Morocco of the USA Today.
Hi. It's sort of a follow-up on what Dave asked. I'm curious, perhaps this is too granular of a question as you mentioned previously, but I'm curious as to what percentage of the evidence you guys have of this, the evidence that's being utilized in the suit, or that, what you guys have to basically prove these guys, what they did basically to misbehave. What percentage of these things are in the public domain, and what evidence do you have hasn't been seen by the public and is, stuff that you have that's proprietary, stuff that hasn't been out there already?
That's the kind of question I don't think we want to answer at this time.
I mean, do you guys have stuff like documents, contracts, stuff that basically proves that the UFC engaged in anti-competitive practices?
Well, what I would say is that every allegation in our complaint is backed by sufficient information for us to sign our names to it as officers of the court.
Okay. Is this also too granular in asking, can you give us a sense of what you'd be seeking during discovery and who you'd be seeking to depose?
Yeah, that is too granular. We're not going to go into our legal strategy at this time.
Okay, thanks very much.
Sure.
We have a question from Bob Carson of Carson's Corner.
I just want to address a question to the fighters. Maybe they can and cannot answer this, but is there any concern about possible reprisals from organizations that are considered, feeder organizations for the UFC, like World Series of Fighting or Bellator or anything like that, for fighters that are possibly, under contract or may consider going to these organizations?
This is Eric Kramer again for the legal team. I don't think we want to have anybody speculate about what might or might not happen and what kind of retaliation there might not be. We hope that that everyone out there respects what is happening here and what these people are doing. They're fighting for their rights in a court of law, and nobody should retaliate against people who fight for their rights in a court of law. It may happen. It's wrong. It may happen, but we're not going to speculate about whether it will happen or won't happen.
And my second question, I guess it could be addressed to really anybody. What would you say to the MMA fans that say that this will hurt the sport of mixed martial arts?
I would disagree that this will hurt the sport of martial arts. It's been shown over the past 100 years since Theodore Roosevelt initially engaged as the great trustbuster. Open competition only helps the league, helps the fighters, and it helps the fans. So I thank all the supporters, all the fans that I've had throughout the years, and I've had so many come up to me personally and on social media, extending their thanks for engaging in this to hopefully change the landscape so it will benefit the fighters.
And the fans. We hope to improve the sport. We believe competition will improve the sport. That's all about competition.
Well said, well said. And just the last question, if somebody can clarify this, what is Cung Le's status with the UFC right now?
I'm still on contract.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Yes, we have one from John Pollock of the Fight Network.
Hi, guys. I just wanted to ask a question, and maybe this ties in too much with the question from earlier, but approximately a year ago, Gilbert Melendez had his contract come up. He had a very healthy offer from Bellator, and he was definitely a recipient of the free agent market. So my question to you is that with that kind of environment and that precedent that was set, I have a hard time digesting that this is monopolistic when we do have a system that there was a matching offer and a fighter directly benefited from the free agent market.
I think what I would say to that, this is Eric Kramer again for the legal team, is that's the kind of thing that we'll deal with in the lawsuit. But what we find when there is a company in whatever market it exists that's dominating that market through an anti-competitive scheme, you can often see situations where it looks like competition is going on. All I would say is that in a world where there's true competition, you'd see more of that. You'd see higher compensation for all of the fighters, including those that engaged in this kind of activity. So all of that activity that you see now has been suppressed. It has been weakened. And in a world where there's unfettered competition, you'll see a lot more of it, and you'll see a lot more and higher compensation for the fighters.
All right. Thank you very much.
And we'll take our next question from Eddie Goldman of No Holds Barred.
Thank you very much again. A question for Cung Le. You just said to Bob's question that you just answered that you're still under contract for the UFC. If they called you up later today or tomorrow and they said, we want you to fight on such and such a date, obviously it would be 2015, would you still fight for them?
No, I would not fight for the UFC.
Okay. And are you retiring as a fighter, or would you just not want to fight for them anymore?
I think at this point, since we're talking about things that might happen in the future, we'll let that play out in the future.
All right. Well, this is what people want to know. People are much more interested in what the fighters have to say, really.
I truly understand. I've been asked to introduce everyone again, so why don't we do that? My far left, Cung Lee, Nathan Quarry, Carlos Newton, Michael Delangelo, Benjamin Brown, Robert Mazie, Joseph Saveri. I'm Eric Kramer. All right, any more questions?
And at this time, there are no other questions in the queue.
Any other questions in the room?
Question for Carlos. You're not mentioning the suit. What is your stake here? Why are you here?
I just want everyone to know that the sport of mixed martial arts is the most restrained sport in the world. It's restrained by the UFC, and the UFC is the fastest growing monopoly in the world, and I'm here to fix that, address that. And again, I'm here to stand in with my fellow fighters, and we're here to remove the anti-competitive restraints, address the antitrust violations, gain compensation, and for our sweat, blood, our years of dedication and hard work. And I'm here, again, like Kong, for my future generation of fighters, which includes my own children. A big thing I like to say is, for me, I want to be able to fight for what I'm worth and not have to rely on someone else's generosity, or I want to live in a democracy. I want to fight in a democracy, not under a dictatorship. I want to be able to go home and say to the next generation, give me back what I gave you, and that is a better world and a better sport. And I'm here to do that.
And I think there's no better words on which we will end this press conference.